Hey, it's Mike Brennan. We're doing a special segment here on MI Tech TV, which you can find at mitechnews.com. We're with Mary Chris Foxworthy. And so she has come up with a book and a whole program that she called Hark, Follow My Hoofbeats. Let's talk about how this all came to be.
Well, it all came to be because I first wrote a series of 4 children's books, and they were all written in the first person by horses to try and get kids engaged with learning about world history. But I didn't have a way to market the books. I couldn't figure out how can I market these? What can I do? Suddenly had this amazing opportunity just fall in my lap last year. And I don't know if you've ever heard of Breyer model horses, but this is a Breyer model horse, and this is our horse. So Breyer contacted us and said, we'd like to make a model of your horse. And if you own horses, that's like winning the lottery. Every horse owner in the world would love to have their horse made into a Breyer model. You've probably seen them Tractor Supply in different places. So once Breyer did that, it was like, oh my gosh, here's an opportunity for me to market the books, because then they invited us to go to Breyer Fest. Breyer Fest is in Lexington, Kentucky, and they have about 30,000 people attend Breyer Fest. So I thought, what I'll do is write an introductory book, a prequel book. So I wrote a book about the horse, and his name is Hark, and it's called Hark, Follow My Hoofbeats. So this book was all about the evolution of the horse and all about how he came about because he's a Morgan horse. So we took the book down to Kentucky with us, along with Hark, 30,000 people. We had a guest book at our stalls. We had 17 pages filled in the guest book, every state in the United States, China, Australia, Italy. They come from all over the world. People bought the books. They were all excited about them. We got lots of good reviews on Amazon. So that's how we got the ball rolling.
That's such a cool story. I absolutely love that. So, the first set of 4 books were all children's books. When you came up with this idea, was that also a children's book, or who was the audience you had in mind for that?
Well, the audience that I had in mind was ideally children, because I was working for the Equine Heritage Institute in Florida as a research writer, and I'd written about 20 books for them. And I would go down there 2 or 3 times a year and brainstorm with the owner, Gloria Austin, and try and figure out, well, what should we write next? Well, one morning we had both watched the same TV show the night before, and it was one of those man on the street interviews. And they asked somebody, who won the Civil War? And the person said, England. And we kind of laughed about it, but then we thought that's a bit disconcerting. And so, did you know that only 15% of American 8th graders are proficient in history and geography? So Gloria and I got talking and said, well, what can we do about that? And I said, what if I wrote children's books, but what if we wrote them in the first person? What if the horse is telling the story so that we engage kids, and kids get a lot more interested because we're telling the books in the first person. So that's what the first book is called, No Man to Romans. So it goes from the Eocene epic until the fall of Rome. The second book is called Dark to Light, and that's about the Middle Ages. And that book is written by our horse Tyson. He's also Morgan. The third book is about the Renaissance and the Age of Discovery. And that book is, we have a Spanish horse, so we let him write that book because that's kind of what he should talk about, is the Age of Discovery. And the fourth and final book is called Muddy Roads to Men on the Moon. And that book is about modern times and industrial evolution. And again, one of our horses wrote the book. So that's kind of how it all came about. And, when you think about it, we've had horses for 6,000 years. They've been domesticated for 6,000 years. And we've only had cars for a little over 100 years. So before we had the car, the horses were everything: trade, commerce, food, everything. And then we talk in the book, in Hark, Follow My Hoofbeats, which is the prequel to these other 4 books, we talk about the evolution and how horses all came to be the way they look today. Because many years ago, horses didn't look like thousands of years ago, they were the size of a dog and they had toes, they didn't have hoofs. So we talk in the book all about the evolution and how the different breeds came about. For instance, the Mongol horses, they had small, agile horses because of their battle tactics. The Mongols would ride on the horses sitting backwards and shooting their bows and arrows. So they had to have a very small, agile horse to do that. In the Middle Ages, people always, have you been to the Renaissance Festival? Have you ever been to the Renaissance Festival and see the guys jousting on the giant horses? Well, horses weren't that big back then. Horses were only about 14 to 15 hands. So, I mean, that's pretty small. That's a pretty small horse. So if you go to a museum and look at armor, you'll see that the armor for the men and the armor for the horses is equally small, not as big as what you see, when you go to places like the Renaissance Festival. So in the book, we talk about the Middle Ages and the horses and what horses were like then and how they developed and how the sizes changed. Then when we get on into the Hark, Follow My Hoofbeats book, and we're talking more about different breeds, get into the horses during the Renaissance. What kind of horses did they have then? And military battles and so on had changed. So they needed a different kind of horse. They needed a larger and faster horse. But again, there weren't any breeds. These were just types of horses. And it wasn't until after the Renaissance that breeds started getting developed. And even in America, when the explorers brought the first horses to America, they were very small horses. And they even made laws, like in Pennsylvania and so on, because horses would just graze wildly out anywhere and they would breed by themselves. And so all these horses were way too small for America for the work that needed to be done. So they had laws saying that you couldn't let your stallion, if he was under 14 hands, graze on the public property for fear that this horse was going to breed another small horse. So a lot of things that we don't think about, and how history was so affected by horses is what we wanted to address in these books and let children start enjoying about learning history through the eyes of a horse. It's been fun watching the kids.
Huh. So what powerful themes are woven throughout your Hark, Follow My Hoofbeats?
I think the most powerful thing is that, the domestication of the horse is what changed the course of human history. When you think about all the battles, I've recently been reading a series of books about the Napoleonic era. And when you read about the battles and how I always say in the books, or the horse says in the book, the guy with the better horse wins. And that's very much the truth. The better horse is what was always winning the battles, or the place that had, more horses. For instance, when you think of America in the 1920s, you think, we're all driving around in cars. That's not true. In the 1920s, the horse population in America reached its peak at 25 million horses.
Hmm.
So, you look at some of the older pictures. I have a picture of Marshall Fields in the book, and they're all lined up early in the morning in Chicago getting ready to make deliveries. There has to be about 100 horse wagons all lined up ready to make deliveries in the morning. They didn't have the Amazon guy, and you probably didn't get it 2 hours later in the afternoon. But the world revolved around horses, and I think when kids read the books and they see it through the eyes of the horse, and the books are full of pictures, absolutely full of pictures. And when they see history through the eyes of a horse, it starts to bring it to life. And it starts to make it more interesting for the kids because, they see it a different way because it's the horse telling the story. Oftentimes when we go out and do our presentations with a horse and with the books, it's just watching the smiles. I told my husband one time, we've been showing horses for 45 years. I've never had more fun as we've had doing this with the books and taking our horse different places, because to watch people smile, I don't have to worry about the judge looking at me and saying, you're not first place today. This way, we're always first place because everybody's always happy. So, when you watch how they're understanding history then, and the questions have really been a lot of fun too, the different questions that we get.
Just not to interrupt, but one of the things I read in a history book recently, I remember I saw it on the History Channel, was in the 19th century, towards the end of the 19th century in London, there were 200,000 working horses in London. You just don't think about that,
No, you don't. And that's where, ASPCA got started too, because right now horses are used for pleasure and horses are fun. Back then, people didn't look at horses the way we look at them now. They were beasts of burden. And the people were so concerned in London, and that's where the ASPCA was originally started, was because of London. And also World War I. I don't know if a lot of people know this, but most of Europe did not have any horses when World War I broke out. And then the few horses they did have were obliterated rather quickly. So they asked us here in America to send horses over because, remember, they didn't have tanks and all the things that, we think about now. So we sent millions of horses to Europe during World War I. And they even said all in their veterinary manuals, they said that the horse coming from America was by far better than anything they had in Europe. So when I often see people buying their importing horses from Europe, I'm thinking, and paying big money for them, I was thinking, you're just buying our own horses back.
Yeah.
Yeah, millions of horses. But people don't think about those things. Yes.
You have a lot of hardware behind you, a lot of trophies,
Yeah.
awards, lots of great looking things. Is you mentioned showing horses earlier. Is there a connection, or can you talk about the backdrop you have there a little bit?
Well, we have Morgan horses, and the book Hark, Follow My Hoofbeats, the last part of the book talks about Morgans. So all those things behind us are from the Morgan Grand National. Those are world championships and national championships, and we are very blessed that we have had some wonderful horses throughout the years.
Hmm.
And
Do you know anything about Morgan horses?
I was just going to ask because I feel like I don't know. And if I don't know, maybe someone else out here in listener land doesn't know either. So please tell us.
All right. So Morgan horses were the official horse of the American Bicentennial. It is the only horse that has been descended from one horse. Every single Morgan horse can be traced back to a horse that was owned by a man named Justin Morgan. And he received a horse in payment of a debt in 1789. And he was a music teacher, so he named the horse Figure. But back then, they didn't really name horses. He said that was Justin Morgan's horse. So that's why the horse became known as the Morgan horse. But what was so amazing about this horse that this man had was that it could do everything. He could pull logs out of the lumber camps. He could drive it down to church in the morning. He could use it to ride everywhere he had to go. There's even stories that he raced thoroughbreds that were imported from England, and the Morgan horse beat the horses in the races. There was a book written by Marguerite Henry and a Disney movie many years ago called Justin Morgan Had a Horse. And it's an amazing story because all of us who own Morgan horses can trace our horse back to that one horse. And the traits and the characteristics of that horse, here we are 200 years later, are still the same. I mean, the horses have all of those capabilities that they had, 200 years ago. Pretty
Hmm.
cool story.
Thanks for sharing. Thanks for sharing. And so I'm curious, what do you aim for readers to take away from the profound message in Hark, Follow My Hoofbeats?
Well, the biggest thing that we want them to take away is that, a love of history. So our goal is to get this in many hands as we possibly can. We want them to understand that how much domestication of the horse changed human history.
And how does one reach out and contact you, get the book, any of those things?
Through the website, www.hoofbeatsthroughhistory.com.